It's always good to start again, but this time do the actual recording.
Welcome to another D3 Datacast, a final one for the 2024-2025 season. It's always a little bittersweet to get to this time of year because it's a lot of fun, but it's a long season. And especially as we're starting episodes in October, it's sort of like turns into a 6 month on, 6 month off schedule for us. And I think we're both ready for a break. But it was a great weekend in Fort Wayne. We're back. We got to get this episode put together and out the door because I'm taking my family to Disney World. We're going to Disney World.
Zach, you're right. I think we're ready for a break, but after like 2 weeks off, you and I are going to be ready for D3 basketball again. So next season will be here soon enough. We can't wait already, but let's talk about this season, how things wrapped up. We just finished a really fun weekend in Fort Wayne. We crowned a new champion. Let's go through the weekend, Zach.
Yeah, let's start just by recognizing some people who helped make the weekend so great. Let's start with a group to acknowledge from the National Association of Basketball Coaches. The NABC has some board members in town who represent the Division III level, and they're very involved in putting together some things that make the weekend so great. Mike McGrath, Jeff Brown, Gary Stewart, and Mike Shower are in particular some people to note and to thank. The NABC always hosts like a coaches gathering, and they're very gracious to include media members who are in town, very welcoming of riffraff like us who just do silly YouTube shows and things like that. But our appreciation to them. Matt, there's another group of people involved with the NABC who do a great job coordinating the All-Star game that we get. And hopefully we're doing a good job recognizing everyone who needs to be recognized. But undoubtedly, when you do something like this, you're going to forget a name or leave someone off that maybe we shouldn't have. But I know involved with the All-Star game, taking care of the All-Stars in town and making sure that turns into a great event, which it is. It's a lot of fun to see that game every year. Abe Woldis-Lassie, Jody May, and Nate Frisbee, I know we're very involved from the NABC side, making sure that game happens, making sure the All-Stars who are in town have a good experience with that. And then, Matt, of course, we got to thank some members, all the members of the Men's Basketball National Committee, in particular, the chair, John Alisi, the vice chairs, Cam Fuller and David McGrail. It's been great to get to interact with them and be welcomed by them year over year. And especially our thanks to John Alisi, the chair. His tenure is over, but also he's moving on out of Division III, and so we wish him well. Value the interactions we've had with John over the years. And Matt, another one behind the scenes, John Painter from Maryville College has been there the last few years, helping coordinate the media. He makes sure those press conferences before and after the games run smoothly. Does a great job making sure media has what they need. And he's a guy doing that behind the scenes. So a lot of people, may not even know the great job he does, but certainly want to recognize him here.
Yeah, JP does a great job making sure that we have everything we need, which hopefully is not very much, but he's coordinating everything, making sure everyone has the details. Those press conferences that he runs are great as well. So thanks to John Painter for everything he does behind the scenes. Doesn't get a lot of credit, but things run smoothly in part because of what he does there. And all the people you named, right? From the committee chairs to the NABC folks. Everyone's doing a great job supporting Division III, these teams, these players, making sure that they get the recognition that they deserve so that the fans around the country like us can see these games, can see these teams, can see these players, and continue to talk about them.
And there's another group of people from Visit Fort Wayne, from the Fort Wayne community, from the arena there that do a great job. They really do put on a good event from their side. They're great hosts, and the arena looked great. And we walk in Thursday before the semifinals game, and we noticed just a few extra touches. They had some championship banners from the four Division III basketball champions that had been crowned there in Fort Wayne. That's not something they'd had before, and so it's just like it seems like every year now that we go back to Fort Wayne, there's just another little nice touch. They continue to up the experience, doing a great job. So one more year in Fort Wayne. Looking forward to it. I know they'll do a great job. And then we're on to Pittsburgh, but a little part of me is gonna probably miss Fort Wayne, but I know we'll get a great experience there in Pittsburgh as well. All right, so let's move on actually to the basketball portion of it, Matt. We had an opportunity, did some rapid reactions courtside after the games on Thursday evening. But just to recap the weekend a bit, starting with, we talked about the updated final bracket odds heading into that weekend. And of course, those kind of computer odds, computer ratings might be able to tell you what's most likely to happen, but can never tell you what will happen. But in this case, we really had what the computer saw as the favorites in the semifinals, and then in that championship game is what ended up playing out.
Yeah, it doesn't always happen this way. I think last year, going into the final weekend, Trine had the lowest odds of the four. They win the championship. This weekend, Trinity has the highest odds coming into the final weekend. They win the championship. We did see three great games between four great teams this weekend. I think it was really entertaining basketball. That Wesleyan Trinity game on opening night really did come down to the last couple of possessions. NYU and WashU, there was a bigger gap by the end. Last minute, it really was clear that NYU was going to win, but that game wasn't ever like turn it off kind of a blowout. WashU was always just a couple of possessions away from making that really, really interesting. They just couldn't quite come up with those possessions. And then what a championship game we watched, right? Came down to really the last possession, a deep three that Vetter makes at the end of the game. For Trinity, kind of seals the deal. NYU then can't get a great look of their own on the other end, and that's really Trinity's MO to some degree, is really lock you down on defense. They scored. They went for shots early. They got a couple of second chance opportunities. They scored the basket, and then trusted their defense to prevent NYU from scoring, which they did. Great game. Some great individual efforts from Trinity. Henry Vetter won most outstanding player of the tournament. But up until the last couple of minutes, I think that looked like it was going to be Jarrell Okorogo who was going to win that award, because I think he had double doubles or close to double doubles both nights. He was a force, had a kind of a nice touch on the inside, was a monster on the rebounds as well. So nice all around game from Trinity, and they're deserving champions.
You mentioned the defense. The 60 points scored by NYU in the championship game was a season low for them. You mentioned Okorogo. He's one of those guys. I feel like every year at Fort Wayne, there's a player who is really good, but then being able to sit at that table courtside and watch him play, you really gain an even greater appreciation for how good he is. I know I felt that way about Miles Barnstable a couple years ago. He was a great freshman. You knew he was good, but just to see the kind of pace he could play with and everything was really really stood out. You get a greater appreciation. Jarrell Okorogo was one of those guys for me. Just the elite body control. He takes a lot of shots that you might think, um, not necessarily that are wild, but he's able just to like convert at a higher rate than you think he might otherwise, just because he's just got such great body control. Um, Great performance by him. Matt, we got to talk about Hampton Sanders.
Yeah.
6 for 6 from three for NYU in that semifinal game. Comes out in that championship game. Hits his next one. Starts 7 for 7. Incredible performance by him. He had cooled off a little bit from three, but some big buckets that you might thought turned into like winning type buckets, like we saw from Vetter on the Trinity side. But he had a couple big buckets down late in that game. Kind of a layup and one that was
Mm-hmm.
huge in a back and forth game. Just an incredible battle. And I think that maybe neither team was really able to get that game to play out like they really wanted it to, and that was, I think, to everyone who was watching's benefit. Unless you were clearly rooting for one side or another, because it was one of those games that was just, within a couple possessions
Yeah.
each way the entire game. NYU's largest lead, I think, was
I think it
7,
was
but that
7. Yeah.
was that was sort of in the mid to late part of the first half,
Mm-hmm.
and by the time it got to halftime, Trinity had already closed that. And it felt like, the way that Trinity Wesleyan semifinal played out is really the blueprint that I've come to expect, or think that Trinity wants to play with, right? So it was just a 4-point game, but that was a little bit misleading. Wesleyan had to really play well late to close that gap, but in that kind of early to mid part of the second half, Trinity was able to make their run. They were never able to really do that to extend a lead on NYU. Um, but again, the key for Trinity is they also never really fell behind by a
Yeah.
lot. To me, they're a team that you want to get ahead on, because they're much better, as most teams are, but especially them. The way they play, they want to have a lead instead of having to work from behind. So I think even the fact that they fell behind 7, but kind of quickly kept that from turning into something that would have been like a double-digit deficit was huge for them. And so even though that game didn't necessarily play out like that Wesleyan game did, more of a model of how I think, Trinity wants a game to play, or is like kind of the formula for what Trinity's success typically is. The fact that it also wasn't to the point where they were having to really play from behind, just get it in the last couple minutes and see which side has the guys make the plays. And that night, it was Henry Vetter.
Yeah. And Zach, I think the chatter between the semifinals night and the championship night around town was a lot of people expecting that NYU would come out victorious, in part because it seemed on paper or otherwise that they maybe had the more dynamic individual players, and that when push came to shove, they were going to be able to get better looks and maybe get some baskets that were needed. I maybe a lot of that is correct. Trinity has great players too, but I think what sometimes was missed or overlooked in that kind of discussion, because most people I think we talked to did end up picking NYU, admitted as two great teams, probably the best two teams in the country, but maybe picked NYU. I think what maybe gets missed is just how tough Trinity always makes it on the opposing offense. NYU does have great players. They have great shooters. They have great players who can play inside or outside or drive to the basket. And they got some of those looks, but they also, everything was tough for them. And coming down to the final few possessions, Trinity was just able to grind them out and hit just enough shots on their own side. You mentioned Hampton Sanders, right? He was in a lot of ways NYU's most electric player this weekend. When you think of NYU this year, you think first like seniors and grad transfers, but Hampton Sanders, a sophomore, was incredible as well. They got good performances out of Tristan Howe, and Zayfarini in the final was really good, and Brock Susko had a good weekend. But when at the end of the day, Trinity just made things really, really difficult, as you mentioned, held them to a season low in points, came up with the winning plays. In a lot of ways, that team defense was, and we heard it from Trinity in their post-game remarks. That was their identity all season long. You just kind of grind it out defensively, grind the other teams out, force them to have a tough possession, and Trinity got their points at the end, and NYU was unable to do it. And really, it was impressive the way that the Bantams were able to do that.
And it's funny because you mentioned Trinity with the defense. I think people think of NYU as more an offensive team, but really they're good both ways. If
Mm-hmm.
you look at the final D3 Datacast team efficiency ratings, both rank as top 5 units
Yeah.
offensively and defensively, right?
Yeah.
So yes, Trinity does have the number one defense. Yes, NYU does have the number one offense, by the D3 Datacast efficiency ratings. But, for Trinity, they're also really good offensively.
Yeah.
And for NYU, they were also really good defensively, right? These were just two very, very good teams. And yes, maybe they have the reputations and are, the best on one side or the other, but that's to take nothing away from what they're able to do on the other end of the floor.
And you get a lot of upsets along the way, but this year we had, I think, both the Massey ratings and the D3 Datacast efficiency ratings, the two top teams in the country. It was NYU and it was Trinity. And our computer line said that it was like a 3.5 point game in favor of Trinity, and they won this game by 4. So, for incredible as a tournament that we had, for as incredible of a Final Four weekend we had, and as incredible of a final game that we had, in a lot of ways, the weekend really played out like as expected when it came down to like what these computer systems think. Even if the games themselves are in doubt along the way, and it's up to the players making the plays in the court. It's just funny that it comes down to like that was about what we expected to see, and we were glad that we saw it that way.
hmm And it's especially interesting that it plays out that way in a year, another year in which there could have been a list of 12 teams that could have been in that position that you wouldn't necessarily been surprised about. So the fact that, by the end you get down to what is widely believed to be the two best teams is maybe even more impressive because there is a real depth of the field that they and kind of, collectively in the bracket you have to get through to get to that point.
Yeah. And this is not to cast aside Wesleyan or WashU, who,
Absolutely
as
not.
we
No.
mentioned last week, was like the computer's number 3 team and number 6 team. So like we got like 4 of the very best teams in the country in Fort Wayne and had a great weekend of it.
Right. Yeah. Go back a couple decades with old bracketing and different things like that, and it seemed like there was always just a team that was maybe not on the same level as a couple or the other 3 by the time you got to a Final Four. That's no longer the case. That hasn't been the case for a while
Yeah.
now. You have to be really good to get to the Final Four. There's no, like, sneaking through a weak quadrant. There's no such thing. The committees have done such a good job with bracketing, and just I think that there's so many good teams all over the place. No one gets there by accident. that is certainly the case. So we have our new champion, Trinity. The Bantams win the first men's basketball championship in school history. Congratulations to them. It was a lot of fun to be able to see them this weekend. Very impressive, um, and yeah, I mean, four very impressive teams. It was a great weekend. Congratulations to them. So wrapping up the final weekend of the season, Matt, we got a whole bunch of business to wrap up before we can officially close our season. So let's start with the final review of our picks and the final standings, our final contest between the two of us, our season long contest. Let's run through it one more time.
Yeah, so first we picked the two semifinal games because we knew what the matchups were going to be. Game one was Trinity versus Wesleyan, the NESCAC game here. I was on the side of Trinity. The computer gave it a 4-point line in favor of Trinity, so I picked Trinity to cover that computer line. Zach, you picked Wesleyan plus the 4 points. The computer wins this one. We got our another push. We've had, 4 or 5? Well, I guess we'll figure it out on the next slide. How many pushes we've had this year. But the computer nailed this one exactly correct. And because of that, neither of us can get a point here. The second game was WashU versus NYU, the UAA matchup. This one was 4 points in favor of NYU. Zach, you took WashU plus the 4 points to cover that one. I took NYU, giving up the 4 points, and NYU won by 12. They let us know walking off the court after they had won that one. They said, D3 Datacast, we covered the computer line. So it was great to see that they knew what the computers had to say about their game. But I got that game. And then our championship call your shot. We both selected Trinity to win their semifinal game, so we both get the point there. You were trying to make up points and selected WashU in the other semifinal. I selected NYU in the other semifinal. So I win a point for getting the championship matchups correct. And then overall winner, Zach, you get the point picking Trinity. You believed in the Bantams coming back to Fort Wayne for their second year in a row. This year they leave with a trophy. So you get the point there. I had picked NYU to win that championship game, so I got the correct matchup, but the wrong winner, so I miss the point there. So wrapping up our final season totals, Zach, you were 2-2-1 this week. So you were 46, 49, and 5, just a few picks under 500. I was 3-1-1 on this final weekend, so I was 51, 44, and 5 on the season. So I claim our third ever pick slate contest, I guess.
So now the pattern is set. We alternate. So next year I'm going to win.
And I think now Ryan Scott has beaten us all 3 years. Is that maybe true?
I don't know, but it wasn't close this year.
Okay. Yeah, it was not.
Ryan, I know you're going to let us know your final tally in the standings, yeah. But nobody look, because we can just tell you he thrashed us.
Yeah.
All right, Matt. We like to do a lot of silly games along the way. Another one of those we need to officially wrap up. I guess we could have done this a couple weekends ago, but our conference champion draft. We got together with a great group of media friends here. Ryan Whitnable, the two of us, Bob Quillman and Carl Barkley. We get together for a fun little game to try to pick the conference winners before the season even starts. And the rules there is we go draft style, and then once someone picks their champion from a conference, that conference is off the board. So we all have to look at other conferences to make a pick from. Matt, as we see the trophy presentation photos there. Ryan passed off the trophy as our defending champion to you. Somehow, I don't know, you made some kind of crazy tiebreaker rules, and even though we tied officially, you get the trophy.
Yeah, the tiebreaker rules that we set were that if two teams were tied for the lead, then the tiebreaker would go to if your conference champion actually won the number one seed in the conference tournament. So they won their own conference tiebreakers. You would get kind of the extra point for that. And my 4, Zach, ended up getting more number one seeds than your 4. I think I had all 4 of mine, and you had 2 out of your 4. So I win the championship this year. I've got the trophy right behind me. It's going to be in the background. But Zach, this year was a lot harder than the year before, or at least that's how it ended up. We do this, I think, in October before many teams have even posted rosters. So we're making stuff up, which we do every single week here, to be clear. We're just making stuff up. But this is explicitly really low amount of research, try to figure out what's going on here. But I think when Ryan Whitnable won in year 1 a year ago, he had 6 correct, if I'm right about that. So he got 6 out of our 8 8 rounds correct. This
He still
year,
has right, so he didn't win, but he still holds the all-time record
yeah,
because collectively, we were very poor this year.
yeah, and you could see this year we tied with 4, Zach, atop the leaderboard. Ryan had 2, Bob had 3, Carl had 1. Every last year, like everyone had 2 additional correct. So things were, I don't know if things were just more wide open, if we were just more wrong than usual, or a combination of both. I think there were a lot of conferences. Well, and a lot of these did go down to the final week or two. Like things were still up in the air. This is how it goes. So there was a lot of maybe more changeover in the way maybe we saw things in the preseason and the way things ended up here.
Yeah, somehow we collectively went from 23 correct picks down to 14, so it
Yeah,
was a rough year overall, but
yeah,
that's fun.
yep. So we only had 14 out of 40 correct conference champions. That's pretty good.
Alright, that gives us, something to try to improve on for next year. Alright, Matt, also heading into the season, we had some bold predictions and we had some hot takes. So let's take a look back, see how we did. Starting with my bold prediction, I said in their first season of eligibility as a full NCAA Division III member, Asbury will play for a chance to go to the NCAA tournament, but will lose to Maryville in the CCS tournament championship game. Matt, about the only thing I got right in this is that Maryville did defeat Asbury in the CCS tournament. However, it was in the semifinal, and ultimately it was not Maryville who was going on to the NCAA tournament, as they in turn lost to Huntington in the championship there. So, Matt, that's a clear X. I will point to one little nugget about that I did hit on, but in the full context, it was a full miss.
You and I both enjoy trying to frame as much positive out of our hot takes and bold
Right.
predictions as
We're a
possible. So
positive show here.
yeah, positive. Yep.
Very positive.
All right, Zach, my bold prediction was that neither Hampton Sydney nor Guilford would make the tournament this season. And I had to admit last night, as we record this on Saturday night, to Adam Brazel himself that I made this bold prediction. And he was aware of my bold prediction. And I had to say that I was very wrong about this because not only did Hampton Sydney or Guilford make the tournament this season, but they both ended up making the tournament this year. I was very wrong on picking the ODAC Final Four teams to not get in. I was wrong. That's a big X from our preseason bold prediction there for me. You really can't. There's no way to spin this positively.
No, they both made it.
I got it. I got it wrong. They both made it.
That's an 0 for 2. Yeah.
Yep.
You didn't even get half credit there.
Nope.
Okay. All right. So my hot take, Matt, and as I revisit this, maybe this was more like a second bold prediction. But anyway, my hot take was that there would be no hot takes, I guess, when it came to NPI. The NPI will set the tournament field and the D3 hoops community will mostly shrug. And Matt, I feel like this is a hit, right? I mean, maybe the process and the timing to implement NPI was a bit of a hot topic, but as it played out, we really haven't heard any concerns. And in fact, we've talked to a lot of coaches that were
Yeah.
very happy with the way that it transpired. People could see exactly where they stood. And at the end of the day, I think you could take a group of teams that were like maybe like the first ones out, and you could say this any year. They maybe had certain cases to make compared to the final teams that were in, but it's not like there was any sort of
No.
uh, anything that you would point at and say it got it wrong, right?
Yeah.
At worst, it just had a collection of teams that all had a certain case, and it had to draw a line somewhere, and that's what happens. But and maybe we focus on the in and out aspect of it at like a pool at an at large bid cut line. But I think that what we got from the top 8 seeds, those new top 8 protected seeds, was quite good. All right. In years past, I think based on the old criteria, sometimes it's pretty clear who a top overall seed might be. But when you look at where they actually rank in terms of a Massey ratings or a top 25 poll. Like there's some pretty big disagreement. But this year, I feel like we had an NPI top 8 that was pretty well in agreement with how human voters saw it in a D3hoops.com top 25 poll. And then if you look across several different computer rating systems, they're all kind of all in the neighborhood. So I think whether you're looking at the very top or looking at where that cut line is for at large selection, it was pretty good, and seems to be working out pretty well for men's basketball.
Yeah, and I think with 25 to let's call it 28 games that most teams play, I think there's enough data that the NPI system works really well. I think the men's basketball committees and the women's basketball committees did a good job of understanding the dials and setting them with intent in a way that worked. I don't think that there was a lot of like serious outcry of NPI is bad because of X, Y, or Z when it came to the basketball selections. I think it made sense. And I think the kind of the last types of teams that were above the cut line and the teams just below the cut line were very similar to the types of teams that would be in the same mix in the old system. So I don't think it was the exact. It would have been different under the old system, but it would have been very similar, right? And I don't think it was a jarring difference. I don't think there was a ton of teams or really any types of teams that got in that would have been out under the old system. I think it was very similar. I think it was very smooth the way it ended up. And I think the final process, the final outcome, maybe not how NPI was implemented. I think there were some coaches that questioned the timing and the dissemination of information. But when it came to NPI selecting the teams and showing the data, I think everyone was very happy or pleased enough to see how the results came out. So we're going to give you a check mark on that one.
Good job, team.
All right, Zach, time to talk about this one, my season wrap-up hot take review. We did have some discussion in Fort Wayne that we don't need to rehash, but there was one social media user that had disagreed with my position on this all season long. But mine was that the CCIW has either one nationally relevant team or they have none. If you can go back and watch, I did kind of narrowly define that a little bit, Zach. But we're going to go ahead and give me so the context was that Illinois Wesleyan and Carthage were voted really tightly in the coaches' preseason poll, and I was surprised by that. Now, Carthage did go on to win the CCIW, so I think the CCIW coaches were onto something there. But I'm also gonna just spell out here how Carthage finished number 40 in the Jacob Shower rankings, number 58 in the D3 Datacast efficiency ratings, number 29 in the Massey ratings, and that's number 45 in Massey Power as well, if you want to talk about that. Likely not going to be in the Massey or in the D3Hoops.com top 25. They did make the tournament. They lost in the first round to St. Norbert. I think at the end of the day, though, how I was defining this was my hot take ended up being correct here. Illinois Wesleyan was kind of a top 10 team for much of the year. They might end in or around the top 10. I'm not sure where they'll end in the top 25 poll. They made the Sweet 16. So I think they were the team that was maybe the national contender for one of those, like a championship-like contender. And even though Carthage won the CCIW regular season, I still don't think that they were in that same national mix that Illinois Wesleyan was.
And a neutral arbitrator ruled in your favor. So yes. Check mark.
Yeah, they did. Yep. But we'll end that one there, and we won't need to bring that up again until maybe later in this episode.
Okay. Yeah. And maybe you'll be a little bit more thoughtful about next year's hot takes. Okay,
yes.
Let's go on. One more to wrap up here, Matt. Our Pool C draft. Every year we get together in December and we try to make our picks draft style as to who we think are going to end up in those at-large bid spots. 21 up for grabs this year, so we did 11 picks each. And our scoring system is 3 points for each correct at-large bid at the end of the season that we get. But still a point if one of those teams ends up with their conference's automatic qualifier. And Matt, this is another one that we split the first 2 years, and you've come back to win this one, 25-14. My pick started off so well, just fine. Not quite as good as yours, but that's the theme for this contest, I think. And then things went south after that. But 25-14, yeah.
Well, you can see the top half of your picks, Zach, and mine. We were both pretty locked in. Right? I had WashU, Wesleyan, Emory, Stockton, Hamilton, where you had NYU, Tufts, UW La Crosse, Carthage, Denison. All those teams made the tournament. The downside for you is 2 of them won the Pool A, so like that you're still picking the right teams. And I just got fortunate that I picked Emory, whereas you picked NYU, and that early in the season, right? This was December 16, so we were only about a month into the season. It looked like maybe Emory was the favorite at that time, and NYU would maybe be the number 2, and that ended up flipping through conference play. And then I really did work in the back half where it was a little bit more hit or miss. All the teams you picked were in really good position. I think in December 16, they looked really good and then tailed off. And the teams that I picked, a couple of them tailed off, Worcester and Oshkosh in particular. But I think like Roanoke really caught fire, I think, going in through ODAC play, and that helped me out. I picked Illinois Wesleyan there, who was a Pool A, Macon stayed strong. So I think it was just those kind of borderline picks just ended up breaking my way, whereas yours kind of ended up tailing off just a little bit there.
Yeah, and I think if I'm looking at it, the maybe the mistake that I made. Of course, remember we're doing this for the first time in a new era of trying to figure out what this is all going to look like in NPI. And in the past, I think we had better information, maybe better forward-looking information to work off of than we've
Yeah.
had here. And so you're right. Whether it's a mistake, or a lessons learned, or just the way it happened to work out this year, I think that I was hurt by looking too much at what the NPI standings may have been at that time and projecting that forward. Now, there was a reason that those teams were in that position at that time, but at the same time, maybe I was thinking that their position would be a little bit more secure than it
Mhm.
turned out to be.
Yeah, there was
So
still.
it's also an interesting lesson just watching NPI play out for the first time. So you could have a team a month, 2 months into the season that maybe looks like they're in good shape, but we've talked about how, in many ways, that it would be a more dynamic system. And I
Yeah.
think that maybe that's on display here, where you take a collection of teams that looked like they were in pretty good position that changed fairly quickly.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be dynamic no matter what. So teams have to keep winning games, or else they're going to fall a lot. But I think we really need to get to that minimum wins threshold point before
Yes.
things really even solidifying, to any degree. I think we kind of found that out this year.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, for something that matters a little bit more, Matt, top 25 voter in the D3hoops.com top 25 poll. One ballot yet to submit. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so our personal show silliness aside, this is an official top 25 ballot that will go to the folks at d3hoops.com for the final poll of the season. And again, can't believe that we're already there. So, this year, usually I have to make the decision of, do you vote the national champion number one, or do you vote the team that you think is still the best team but maybe stumbled along the way? I think this year everyone has the luxury of being able to say that's the same team this year. I think Trinity is both the best team in the country after now playing through an entire season, and they are the national champion. And I think there's no, but if you reran the tournament 100 times, who would win the most? We would get different winners, that's for sure. But I think Trinity has a chance of winning the most. As our projections said all along when we were doing our tournament previews, they were always one of the favorites. They ended up winning it, and I think that makes it very easy up at the top. So I have Trinity, Connecticut number 1, NYU number 2, Wesleyan number 3, WashU number 4. I think I have no problem this year picking the final 4 teams as the top 4. I think they were all in that mix coming into the weekend, and I think they're all right in that mix coming out of the weekend. Then I continue with UW Platteville at 5, Emory at 6, UW La Crosse at 7, Illinois Wesleyan at 8, Redlands at 9, Hampton Sydney at 10, St. John's at 11, Catholic with a big jump up. They had a really nice tournament. They'd been in my top 25 and out at times of the season, but finishing up here at number 12. Randolph-Macon at 13, Tufts at 14, number 15 Roanoke, 16 with Wisconsin Lutheran, making a decent jump up on my ballot here. They were impressive. Number 17 WPI, number 18 Calvin, number 19 Christopher Newport, number 20 Chicago, number 21 John Carroll, number 22 Keene State, number 23 Giroux, number 24 Denison, and number 25 St. Thomas. So one of the discussions I had, a personal discussion in my own head discussion, was, what do you do with teams that are kind of in those last 5 or 10 spots in your ballot and then lose a first round tournament game? That's difficult to do. You have to figure out, well, is someone coming up and replacing them? There were a few teams that maybe fell out of my final ballot, a few teams coming back in. But a team like John Carroll, they lost, I think it was a 2-point game against York, Pennsylvania in the first round. That was a game that ended up being at York, Pennsylvania, because it couldn't be at NYU because they're women. So what kind of should have been a neutral court game was a road game for John Carroll, and they lost by a possession. So to me, that's kind of like a, don't ding them too much for an evenly seeded game. So just for example, a team like John Carroll does stay in the top 25, not really falling too much, even though they lost a tournament game. In a game that looked like it was a close game.
Yeah, and so I think some of the talk among voters before the final was, yeah, I mean, I think we got the number 1 and number 2, so you could pretty much fill out your ballot 3 through 25. Now, I'm not sure anyone had actually done that, although you definitely could have, and then it's just a matter of, okay, who's 1, who's 2, because there was a definite feeling like we got the top 2 teams in this championship game, and this game's gonna determine, what order
Yeah.
they get voted in. and then it's just a matter of figuring out 3 through 25. Matt, we talked a lot about that maybe last 5 spots throughout the year. Those final 5 spots, there was never really felt like there was a satisfying or correct answer because there was a group of, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 teams that could occupy that bottom of the ballot range and at different times cycled in and cycled out. So how did you think about maybe rounding out that top 25 ballot, trying to balance, you talk about the finish with the tournament and especially if that's like a first round loss, but also at this point the season's over, uh, trying to weigh how teams finish the season versus taking a step back and trying to make a ballot based on a total body of work. I mean, that's always a discussion as you're doing weekly ballots, but the final one's a little bit different, I think, right? This is sort of the is it I guess like that's the question. Is this a little bit more kind of a full season achievement type ballot, or are you looking more how did teams play the last couple weeks?
I still really like the context of the total season. Do want to weigh more heavily the last couple of weeks. So a team like Catholic, who did make a deeper run into the tournament, I think they made a lot of movement upward. I think when it's once though you get past the top 16 or 20, you're talking about teams where you didn't really end up, like, you can't have 20 teams make the Sweet 16, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So these are teams that were
Right.
expected to kind of bow out in the first or second round, depending on what the matchup was like. So a team like Calvin lost to Wisconsin Lutheran, who beat UW Platteville, right? So I kept them in my top 20 because I think they had a good matchup against a tough team that they didn't win, and the tough team is now ahead of them in the ballot. So I think that was fine keeping them in. I really would have loved, though, to submit a top 20 in this ballot. I think I felt really good about 20 teams, and then I felt like there was like another 25 that I needed to consider for the final 5 spots. But it's just really difficult. I think I did for those spots especially, because that's the case of like, well, did they win a tournament game or lose a tournament game, and who was it against, and was it a tough game or not a tough game, and where was it played, and all that. So for those spots, I really did lean more on what was their total season like. A team like Drew had kind of a disappointing showing in their NCAA tournament game, but they had a really impressive total season, right? They beat Catholic. What was it, 3 times? At least 2 times. I think they had a nice season. I think putting them in at number 23 to me still made sense, even though their tournament game wasn't exactly what they wanted. And I didn't want to judge them just on one game when we had a whole bunch of other games to look at too. So that's where I ended up. I think other voters could make other choices. I don't know that I made the exact correct choice, but that's why I did that.
Well, that's why there's 25 voters. Everyone approaches it a little bit different. By the time you aggregate 25 ballots, you hope that the final poll, uh, you know, represents pretty
Yeah.
well like
Mm-hmm.
the season, especially at this point with a final poll. So, all right, a lot of fun to look at that every week, Matt, and especially those final spots. So interesting to hear you talk about how you thought about them. This being the last time, right? There's no like, oh well, if they don't earn it, then I'll drop them and put someone else in next week. There is no next week. So you know, there's probably not much difference between 25 and 26, 27, 28, 35, whatever.
35, yeah.
But the way the top 25 ballot works is there's only 25 spots. So it creates a very stark line of delineation. One more mailbag for the season. So we got a message from Max Fan on Twitter. Go Maccabees said it was a two-parter. Matt, I'm not sure that this first part is a question or anything for us to address, but it was specifically sent to us as a two-parter, so we'll get this first one in. This season will be known as the season of NPI, but will also be known as the year D3 Datacast became an indispensable resource for hashtag D3 Hoops. From making Monday mornings fun to being able to check NPI numbers / simulations, efficiency ratings, and score predictions every day. On behalf of so many fans, thanks for all you do. Looking forward to what next season has in store. So Matt, I don't know. It's nice to
Yeah.
hear that people get something out of our silly little show that we just do sometimes to entertain ourselves. But thank you very much. It's nice to hear that something we do to have a little extra fun with the Division III basketball season helps other fans out there have a little extra fun as they're following a Division III basketball season.
Yeah, we do it because it's fun, and we do it because we like to connect to Division III basketball. So if it helps other people connect to Division III basketball and have fun with it along the way, I think then that's what we want to be doing. So thank you very much, Max Fan.
All right, part two, which I consider the real mailbag. part here. Now that we have a full season of NPI behind us, did anything surprise you about it, and would you change anything about it?
I don't know that I would really change much yet. I think I like it. I think I like it better than the old system. There's a certain amount of debate that you do miss because in the old system you would say, I would rank this team first in that region. No, I would rank this team first in that region. And but I think it's a lot cleaner to have what we have. I think it gets you to a very similar answer without a lot of the headache. I think if I was on the men's basketball committee, I would wonder if we should continue in the future having the difference in dials between the non-conference weighting and the conference weighting. Not because I think it's bad or wrong. It's just it adds another layer of complexity to the system, and it probably doesn't get you to a very different answer than just having one multiplier for home and road, and then you it's part of it's a me problem, right? On our data, then we have to keep track of the games. But I think on the NCAA side of things, I think we saw a couple of times in the early NPI releases from the NCAA where some of those times where conference teams played in non-conference games, it gets initially listed as conference when it was supposed to be non-conference. And it's probably just because you have like 400 schools helping to input information. And if they just like, I don't know how the information goes in on the back end, but it probably just like, well, these are two conference teams playing. Someone has to then wade through that data. I think a lot of the RAC committee members had been wading through data and comparing it. It's really easy to miss that on the first pass and have to go back and fix it later. I think the NCAA did a really good job. Anytime something came up and it looked a little incorrect one week, it would be corrected on the next run. So I just wonder if that complexity, if the juice is worth the squeeze there for the extra layer of complexity it adds.
Yeah, that also is the only thing that really jumped out at me as something that I would immediately change. And that's not something I think we need to see play out because of this is a 1 year anomaly, right? This is something that has shown to be a problem, and if you weight all conference and non-conference games the same, like you said, it doesn't really produce different results. So while there may be a philosophical reason to, when you explain the difference in words, there may be a philosophical reason why you want to do that kind of thing. I think the net effect doesn't really result in anything that lines up with what they're trying to do. And so the fact that we see it produce some inconsistencies in the information, right? Because we're running and posting NPI numbers all season long, so they get to the point in the season when the NCAA is posting those as well. So we are going right to just trying to make sure everything's in alignment. And anytime that there's any disagreement, start trying to dive in. And you would think that the issue would always be on the unofficial side, but what we found is that in maybe a handful of cases, it was the official side that had the incorrect information, right? And so clearly, this is something that's causing an issue in terms of just being able to have accurate information out there, and with it not actually yielding any results that mean anything in terms of differences. Like it doesn't really seem to be doing anything that would be different if we just weighted all the games the same. So why don't we just weight all the games the same?
Yeah, and I don't think we did a deep dive comparison on maybe what the differences would be. And this was year one for everyone. So I think, the national committees and the RACs kind of maybe know where to look or what to do a little bit differently in year two. You're always learning things and always implementing things. So it's probably likely to be a little bit better next year anyway for all of us, the unofficial side too and the official side. So I'm probably not personally like driving any train for like this needs to end or be different necessarily. For me, it's just very much more of a is the juice worth the squeeze? I think we understand the messaging of like you still want teams to go out and schedule good non-conference games, especially games that might take them away from home. We definitely are on board with all of that too. Just is it, and there's going to be evaluation on all the dials, right? Is it doing what we want it to do? I think they're probably going to take a look after year two or year three or whenever the window opens up for them to look at dials. Are all of these things doing what we want them to do with quality win bonus and multiplier and everything? And they're going to look at tuning it. But I think overall, I think pretty good, pretty smooth. I really enjoyed year one of NPI, and I think it produced a well-seeded tournament, and I think they used that to disperse teams and bracket teams, and I think it all made sense. I think the top 8 made sense. I think the selections made sense. Nothing stuck out as obviously wrong or needing to change when it came to probably either men's or women's basketball.
Let's go on to the next one from Ron. Of the Final Four or the Sweet 16, who do you think has the best chance of winning next year? And anyone not in the picture this season who could be next?
I have two. I have two teams. Do you have anyone you want to say before I say, or you want me to jump in, Zach?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of talk this weekend about Trinity was there this year. They were there last year. They could be back next year. They have certainly some losses, but they've got a lot of guys who have a lot of experience who will be back, a lot of championship experience who will be back. And I don't. It's too early to say whether they're going to be the preseason number one. And even if they are, we've seen in recent years a defending champ that's also a preseason number one doesn't really guarantee anything. But I think they're definitely one who will be in the mix heading into next season. Will be seen as uh, certainly one of the top 5 teams next season, and not just because they're the defending champ. Right? There's a
Yeah.
lot coming back there, and they're one for sure that I would list. It's a little bit difficult to answer in this era that we're in right now because
Mm-hmm.
you look at how bad of a job we did without a lot of rosters trying to pick just conference champions back in October, whenever it was. So to sit here now without rosters, without all the player movement we see these days to try to pick that out. But I know you've got another one you've been dying to talk about.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Trinity's the one that who could be back, right? I think they had. I think it was 8 of their 10 rotation players who played this weekend have a chance to return for them next year. So again, will all those players come back and everything? I think stands a good chance to be yes. So I think they're a really solid pick. I think you can almost pencil them in as the preseason number one next year. We'll have to see where that is. I think you're right about all of that, Zach. I think a team not in the mix this year that could be a contender. Again, we don't know the status of every roster, but we were as we were casually listing teams with other people around Fort Wayne this year. I think a team that did come up several times was Carthage. I think that they will be in the mix last year. They won the CCIW this year. They made the tournament. And I think a lot of those guys that are there on the roster have a chance to come back. A lot of their really, really good players. So I think that's a team that will be very much in the mix next year. And if you're looking for a team to get back to Fort Wayne, and you can include that as the Elite 8 round because it'll be a round earlier next year in Fort Wayne. So especially if you're thinking about 8 teams, I think Carthage is one of those teams that could very much be in the mix, kind of from outside the Final Four weekend as well. I think there's probably some other teams that will show up as probably early season favorites. We'll have to see kind of who those are when maybe some of the transfer portal or even just like commitments and roster stuff starts to settle for next year on what those will be. So we'll probably do like a really way too early predictions episode at some point in either the off season or the early season because we are not shy of making way too early and unfounded predictions.
Yes, but there's your earliest one, Matt, is that Carthage will be nationally relevant next season. One more from one-on-one basketball. It's a two-parter here. With a year of NPI under the belt, what do you think are the most important factors for increasing NPI rating? Matt, I've got an easy answer here. Win games.
Win games, beat good teams. Yep.
Yeah, more than anything, it's important to win.
Yeah.
So, win games. That's the most important factor. And yeah, if you win, and the better the team that you're beating, the better you will be.
Yep.
That's really the key to the whole thing. And then maybe also related in that discussion, Matt, we could say number 2 seems to be big difference in conferences. So is there anything smaller conferences can do to keep up with the NESCAC, UAA, ODAC, we'll say, etc.?
Yeah. First thing I would call out is that this is not an NPI difference. I think in this case, NPI continues the trend in the previous system. NESCAC usually would get 2, 3, 4 teams in the tournament under the old system. UAA would get 2, 3, 4 teams in the old system. ODAC similarly. I think that just means that NPI did not change these conferences' ability to get in, or that it's valuing these conferences or the teams at the top of these conferences very similar to the way the old system is. So I think this is not, first of all, it's not new in NPI. It's the same as the old thing. But I think the answer is very similar. What do these conferences do? What do they have in common? They have a lot of good teams. These teams win a lot of games in the non-conference, and they're quite often beating other good teams in the non-conference. So that kind of it doesn't like set your conference NPI level, but it kind of does how your conference as a whole does in the non-conference. Then kind of elevates and starts to solidify where your top teams will be ranked through conference play, because your opponent's NPI goes into your NPI calculation. So do a lot of work as a league in the non-conference. Don't just play a bunch of teams. Don't just have the bottom of your league play a bunch of tough opponents and get smoked and then come in with really bad NPIs. Like, you have to be smart about scheduling. I think the way I've said it before is you should schedule where you are. So if you're a top 25 team, you probably want to be playing a bunch of other top 25 teams in the season. Now, that might come in your conference if you have other teams in that mix. If you're in a weaker league, you got to go find those in the non-conference, but you need to have a bunch of those games in the, like, especially like top 50 type games or top 100. Like, you got to play teams around where you are. If you're in the back half of Division 3, if you're like a Massey number 200 or 300 type team, don't go play Hampton Sydney. Don't go play Carnegie Mellon. Like, you want to be playing teams that are back by you, teams that you have a chance of beating, and grow your NPI that way. That will help your conference grow their NPI, and that will get more at-large bids into your conference.
What I will add to that, though, Matt, just going back to winning games, right? So schedule against against competition that you feel like you're at the level of, right? And just play it and win games. Now, for teams who are in that sort of tournament contention level and they happen to play in a weaker conference, in the old system, what we would see is they would get into conference play and it would tank their SOS or something like that. What we've seen with NPI is that there's a wider variety of potential kind of, let's call it, old system resumes that are suddenly viable. So it used to be that, you maybe have like a 850 winning percentage, but oh, sorry, your strength of schedule number is under 500, and those were just kind of seen as non-viable. So, we haven't run an updated list to see like what everyone's kind of old system criteria numbers would have been, but go back to the regional ranking comparison that we did earlier in the season, back at the time where we would have started getting regional rankings. And there we saw that NPI was giving more credit or valuing higher than the old system would have a lot of those type of resumes that were the high winning percentage, but low strength of schedule type resumes. And it goes back to, strength of schedule in the old system is not quite the same as what strength of schedule is in this system, right? So under the old system, it would have said you didn't play a good schedule, but NPIs might have said, well, the way that we look at everything, you didn't actually play that bad of a schedule, right? And so then all of a sudden you won all these games, so now NPI, you're looking good. So whereas it used to be that it seems like if you're in a weaker conference, there's some teams that had a schedule where it was like no matter how many games they won, they basically didn't have a path to an at-large bid. I think that's very different. I think that everyone now has an at-large bid path. Now, for some of those schools that are in a weaker conference and maybe don't play the best non-conference schedule, it may be that you can take that one loss that knocks you out of automatic bid contention, but if you take another one, then you're done, right? Yeah. Everyone has I think everyone has a path, and it's just a matter of how much margin for error you have, depending on how good your league is, how many wins outside of league play your conference is getting, how good your non-conference schedule is. And that's where we see, all right, can you take 5 losses? Can you take 7 losses and still be viable? Or are you going to be one of those teams that plays a schedule where, by the time you take that 3rd loss, it's like, you're probably on the outs.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is because NPI has the ability to drop some of those really bad games. So I think an interesting analysis that I didn't think of until just now would be to run old system SOS numbers, but take into account which games NPI has dropped. So if it's dropping, the bottom 4 teams from your conference because they're really bad teams, then run an old system SOS, removing those games, and just see what the new number SOS would be. Because I think we compared it to like, a 490 is viable now. But for some of those teams, would that have bumped it back up to a 515 or something like that? Just getting rid of some of the lowest rated teams on their SOS, because that was one of our biggest problems with the old system. Is it was as much to do with how bad are the worst teams on your schedule rather than just how good are the good teams on your schedule. And if you're trying to debate who should get in for one of those at-large bids, you're talking about like the number 40 or so team in the country is kind of around where the at-large bid cutoff line is. Shouldn't we be caring more about the games that teams are playing around that kind of top 50 range and less about who are they playing in the bottom 200 kind of a range? So NPI does do that, and I think that would be maybe an interesting thing to look at here. But yes, play good teams, win good games. I don't want coaches or fans to mishear us, though. It's not that you can have a good NPI really just by playing trash and winning 85% of your games against trash. Like, if you have a really bad schedule, you have to win all of them except for maybe like one to not do it. So it's not just like load up on bad teams. I think we saw that a little bit in the way the football NPI is implemented. If you can just kind of play bad teams and then end up with a good NPI if you beat them all. The basketball system is better in that it's not quite like that. You really do have to schedule good teams. Otherwise, you get really punished for every loss you take if it's not against good teams. So don't just load up on a cupcake schedule. That's not the way to get the wins that you want to get in an NPI. But you want to win the games. Win the best games that you can.
All right, that wraps up the mailbag. One last thing to do, offer another word of thanks, this time to our great group of supporters through the Patreon platform, patreon.com/D3Datacast. Matt, it's almost time to come up with another slide format because this one is filling up, even after we had to change it from the column format we had before. But Matt, we did a bad job last time out. We had a group of people that didn't get their name shout outs that they deserve as new subscribers. So we've got them highlighted here, and we'll make sure to give them their shout out here. Jennifer Albers, Paul, Tom DiBiase, and Hunter Davis. Thank you so much joining the crew here, supporting us on Patreon. You know, all that information we have on d3datacast.com. These people help make it happen without paywalls, without ads, messing everything up. And we couldn't be more grateful for that. Also helping us do trips. Like we went to the SICMA Invitational in Bloomington, Illinois. We've done Great Lakes Invitational trips. Of course, our trip we just returned from in Fort Wayne at the Final Four weekend there, all made possible because we have a great group of people supporting us behind the scenes.
Yeah, really just incredible, Zach. When we launched the show, we didn't really think that this many people would watch the show, much less want to support the show. So we thank you so much for joining us at either the $5 or the $3 level. That's so awesome. We had a chance even to meet people for the first time down in Fort Wayne who introduced themselves, said, hey, love the show. And they happen to be names like that we knew were on this list. So it's just so incredible that the Division III community can support each other, that can come together to talk about Division III basketball. We believe, Zach, that these are teams and programs and players that deserve discussion and deserve to be talked about. So we're just happy to play some role in that discussion, joining others that do it as well. But just to be part of that group to help, in whatever small way that we can, raise the profile or raise the discussion level of Division III basketball just a little bit.
So one last time this season, though, Matt, we won't go completely dark. Usually our off-season goal is to have some sort of episode out monthly instead of weekly, and look forward to maybe taking on some fun projects over the off-season and kind of get refreshed, recharged for another season, go back weekly next October. Looking forward to it already the next season, but going to take some time to refresh and recharge.
All right, Zach, enjoy Disney World. But for now, we're going to say good job,
Mouse
team.
ears.